Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our third report and inquiry designer class. This is the third in a series of 4 sessions that we're doing on being able to get information out of your Sage 300 CRE software. In this class, we're going to be looking at the inquiry designer application. This is a module that you have to purchase from Sage that will give you the capability of kind of drilling down into the data within your database for Sage 300. My name is Jeanette, and I'll be your instructor for this morning as we go through this application. So what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to take a look at some features with this design module. We're going to take a look at the data structures for inquiry. They're a little bit different than Report Designer. We'll briefly review the record relationships. These are always the same regardless of what design module you're looking at. We'll talk about the inquiry levels and views. There are different types of screens that you can look at with the inquiry application, and we'll talk about the differences and then the setup. We're going to talk about some concepts as far as the inquiries are concerned. We'll discuss the formulas. Not all formulas can be used here in inquiry, so we'll talk about the 2 that can and what the rules are for those formulas. I want to go over some inquiry planning with you so that you have an idea. You need to have an idea of what it is you're trying to accomplish before you sit down, especially when you're creating a brand new inquiry from scratch. We'll review the design basics, kind of a high-level overview, and then we're going to get into the software and actually demonstrate creating a new inquiry and what all the different pieces are and how you can get those to interact within the inquiry. Then lastly, I'll remind you of a few tips before we close for the session for the day. All right, you should have a handout. There were actually 2 documents that came with the meeting invitation. One is a copy of this PowerPoint presentation. The other is a Word document that's 22 pages. We're actually going to review this as we go through. I've got screenshots in it, so it'll be a good place for you to follow along and to take notes in. All right, so features. So an inquiry is a little bit different than a report design in the fact that you can design an inquiry at a high level or at a kind of a summary level of the data that you're looking at, and then it allows you to drill down into the information or the transactions that make up that higher level of summary. So it in a way it's a lot can be a lot more useful than a report because you're looking at multiple levels of information within the application. So we're going to take a look at how to create and save new designs if you have the Inquiry Designer application. You can also open up designs that have been supplied to you by Sage. So I'm going to show you where those inquiries are actually stored. And then if you have the application and you want to go in and modify one that has been provided by Sage to always pull up the same columns and not have to re-add those columns every time you go into the design, I'll show you how to do that. Again, these inquiries can be created with a lot of detail or summary information, or they can be designed to go from a summary level down to the detail level. We can bring formulas into the inquiry. I'll talk about the rules about those formulas and where those are going to come from. We can also share the views with other inquiries. So the nice part about the Inquiry Designer is once you have designed a view or a window off of a certain record, you can pull that view into other inquiries and save it within that new design. So that the idea here is that you don't have to always recreate the same view, maybe as a starting place or a jumping place to within another design. So we can share parts of these inquiries amongst themselves. And I'll show you why here in just a second. The last thing here is security. We can assign security to the design itself. So if you don't want anyone to be able to go in and modify any of these inquiries that you've created, we can set security up on that. So the kind of the components of the inquiry files themselves, I'm going to show you where these are stored. We're going to talk about the data source. This is kind of a review from our report writer class. We'll talk about inquiry levels within an inquiry. Again, we'll talk about record relationships. Just again, a kind of a review from our report designer class. We're going to look at setting up an inquiry view. We're going to look at table views. These are a different, two different ways of looking at the data within an inquiry. An inquiry view is the views that come up with columns. A table view is just kind of like a flat screen with multiple fields of information that is pulled for a specific record. We'll talk about column-specific jumps. What we're talking about there is being able to drill down within a specific column to different information specific to that column, and I'll demonstrate that for us. And again, a review on formulas. Now, in your handout on page 1, sort of in the middle of that page, the files for inquiry. So when you first get the software and install, each application has a default file, and these files are located in the inquiry folder underneath accounting within Sage. So each application has the 2-character abbreviation .inq as the extension. Now, there's only one default file for each application. Every single inquiry that comes with your software from Sage is stored within that one file for each application. What we're doing when we're designing when Sage designed the inquiries is that within that file are the separate views that make up the inquiry. And this is how we're able to share different views within multiple inquiries within that application. Now, once you start making changes or you start creating your own inquiries, the software will automatically copy the default name, the default file that comes with Sage, over to a custom file name that has the word user in it. So you'll see, as our example here for AP, we start out in a file called ap.inq, and then as soon as we start making modifications or additions, that file becomes, is copied to apuser.inq. And then from that point on, this is the file that accounts payable will use when you bring up your inquiries. And then any changes that you make from that point on are made in this user file. So the default file that comes from Sage is never changed. It gets copied, and then that copy is what's used from that point forward. Okay, and again, each application will have at least the default file, potentially both the default and the custom file. And again, each inquiry that we create is stored within the custom file. Okay, so it's different. It's a little different than reports. Each report design is given its own name with a .rpt extension on the end, but the inquiries are not. They're stored within the custom or the default file. Let's do a little overview on our data structure. So this is exactly the same thing that we saw in Report Writer, where Sage is storing the information about our company in a company folder. Within that folder are the data files. The files that we're going to be dealing with will depend on the records that we pull in to that inquiry. It will probably be master and transaction the majority of the time. And then within those files, whatever files we pull into the inquiry are records, and that's where we're going to get the information that's going to show up within our inquiry. Now, the other thing is on page 1 of your handout, the review of the types of transaction files, new, current, and history. And you'll select that when you start the inquiry. If you've pulled in a transaction record, it will ask you which file you want to view with your inquiry. Now, the inquiries, this is a little, again, different than Report Designer. With reports, you can select one or all three. You can select new, current, and history to run on a report altogether. But with an inquiry, you can't. You will select just one of those three files when you start the inquiry display. Now, within those transaction files, again, we've got records and we've got fields. And again, if you go on to page 2, I've got a demonstration here of how to view those records and the fields within those records. You do that by going into Report Designer. So the data dictionary is not available within inquiry. So if you want to see what your records are, you have to go into Report Designer and then Tools, Available Fields. And once you do that, you can select to include information for ODBC reporting. If you might be working with Crystal, for an inquiry, you probably don't need that information. You'll just go ahead once you click OK on the Available Fields screen. Once you've selected the records you want to look at, you click OK, and then just click Print Preview or Start if you're going to print this to paper. And then it will give you a report printout here that shows you what those records are fields are within that particular record. So let me I think it would be best if I just go ahead and come into that's not what I wanted to do. Cancel that. Let me actually bring up Report Designer. Okay, so this is, again, under Tools, Available Fields, and we'll just I'll pick the vendor, which is what's shown in your handout, one of them that's shown. And then this is the window where we're talking about selecting the ODBC information. You can or you don't have to select that if you're doing something with Inquiry Designer. And then this is what the fields within that record look like. Now, this is not in alphabetical order. This is in content order. So when you're looking at the printouts, try to visualize where you would be entering information in for this particular record. Now, this is a vendor, so it starts with the General tab. And so this is all the information that you would see on the General tab. And then each tab after that. So it's in order by content. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing the field name, and then you're seeing the type of field that it is, whether it's alpha or a name field, phone, date. Special, if it's a special type field, it'll show you here. It could be an option button or a drop down, and then off to the side here, it shows you what those special values are. These are mostly hard coded by the software. Okay. And then you've got a field length here. Now, at the end of the printout, on the last page, at the bottom, you'll see something called standard orders. These are the keys to this particular record within this file. It's how the system is able to quickly find the information. Now, on a vendor record, the default sort order or the default key is the vendor ID. There is a secondary sort, which is the vendor name, and I'll show you that when we get into the inquiry designer itself. So you need to keep the keep the key information kind of in your head, because this is going to display. Each window is going to display by the default or the first key, the first standard order that you see within the data dictionary. So on page 3, I've identified the information that you're seeing in the data dictionary, and then also the standard orders, a discussion about the standard orders again at the bottom of page 3. Some of these will be available in Inquiry Designer, some will not. Just depends on the record that you're looking at and if the Inquiry Designer program can switch to that alternate key. Okay. So we've kind of talked about this a little bit. Every record has at least one primary key. It'll be the first one listed at the bottom of the data dictionary. And then some have alternate keys or secondary keys that you can use depending on where you are in the inquiry. Now, record relationships. This is one thing we talked about again in the report designer class. There are a couple that you need to be aware of. The one-to-one relationship means that one record is only linked to one record of another type. So the example we're giving here is invoice to vendor. One invoice can only be associated with one vendor. However, if you switch that to one-to-many and switch it around, one vendor can be associated to multiple invoices. So that's the one-to-many relationship, because in a normal situation, you're going to receive multiple invoices from the same vendor. And then the none relationship, this is one that you need to be aware of, where there is no relationship between records. However, you can build a formula that we talked about in our last report designer class, where you use a lookup function to create that record relationship. And how you can tell that there is no relationship, if you look at a check record. Now, the example we're giving here is the check record. There's no place on the check record, or there's no field on the check record for invoice number. So there is no relationship there. But you could build something with a lookup function and the vendor ID to try to build a relationship there. Okay. Those are the three main relationships that you need to be aware of: the one-to-one, the one-to-many, and then the none. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the different types of views. Look at some examples of those before we actually get into the software. So this is some terminology that you need to be aware of. So the table view is the screen that we're looking at here. It's the view that comes up where you're seeing columns of information. And from here, we can drill down. So if we're looking at vendor, in this example, we're looking at vendor totals, and we want to see what makes up this open amount or the year-to-date purchases, we can drill down on those values and get a different type of a table view that shows us information just about that vendor. Or if we click directly on the vendor ID, we may get a list of invoices. So, it just depends on what you're looking for as to where you need to click within this table view to get more information. And then just remember that each level or each table view that we go to is going to have a default view, which means this is the one that will automatically come up when you bring up that screen. I'm going to show you options then to move to different views to look for different information when you're in the inquiry. So here's an example of how this view might work, or how this inquiry might work. So we may start here in the back, and this is where I've got the in your handout on page 5, the start level being at the vendor. So we get a list of all the vendors and we see some summary totals, but we want to see more information about that vendor, so we might double click on the vendor ID and it takes us to a second table, or it jumps to a different table that shows us a list of invoices for that vendor. And then from there, we might want to see more information about that invoice. So we could have a third level, if we double clicked again, that would take us to the screenshot off the top of page 6, which is showing us information about that invoice. I'm going to show you when we get into the design how we can even, these are just straight jumps from one view to another. We have also something called a column-specific jump, where in this example, it might be that this invoice has been paid, and we want to see information about that payment. So we could do a column-specific jump to from the dollar amount under the amount paid column. That would take us to the check information, where we could see the bank and the check number and the date and that. So we've got multiple ways that we can move around within the data using Inquiry Designer. So we're jumping or moving to a different table view from one level to the next. Right, so table view is one of the types of views that we can use within Inquiry Designer. We also have something called a form view. And these can be built at each level. So each column or table view that we have, we can create a form view that gives us maybe more information about that specific record. So we don't get to the screen by doing a jump. There's actually a button that we can click that will take us to the form view. I'm going to show you how to put information onto this window. So this is kind of like building a prompt using the prompt windows inside the report designer and adding text fields, but actually what we're adding are actual fields from the record that you're on. So it's very similar. It's kind of a combination of adding fields to a report, but using kind of the prompt way of doing it, because we'll be able to put descriptions in and that kind of thing, and we can actually move stuff around. We can add text to this window. So we can get a lot of information on here, maybe that you may not want to see or you don't have room for on the table view. All right, so before we get into designing the inquiry, there's some concepts and some planning that I want to talk about, and this is all on page 7 in your handout. So going from one level to another, or from one table view to another, we call that a jump. So that's what we're going to be defining when we get into the Inquiry Designer program itself. We'll start out on a main record, and then we'll assign jumps to each of those screens to get from one place to another. And that's what we mean by one level can have multiple jumps to access additional information. What that simply means is we can jump to a different record for each individual person, like each vendor or each employee or each job. We can have that type of a level jump. We can also have column-specific jumps. So depending on where we click the mouse, that's going to take us either to a brand new table that we've built, or it's going to take us to an entirely different record, depending on how we define the column-specific jump. So again, to remember, to create meaningful jumps, you've got to remember the record relationship. So in our sample that we just looked at, when we jumped from the vendor to the invoice, that's a one-to-many relationship. So when we do that double click on the vendor ID, it's going to bring up every invoice for that particular vendor. At every level, a default table must be defined or saved. So as we build this, it's going to ask us for the name of the view, and then it's going to ask us if we want to use that as the default or if we want to pick an existing table view as a default. The form view is optional. We don't have to build form views at all if we don't want to. That's just an optional way to get additional information on the screen. The views are saved based on record type. And what that means is if we build a view that is using all records from the AP master file, from the vendor record, we can use that same view in another inquiry. And I'll show you when we get in there that if we have an option to change views when we're looking at an inquiry, and when you click the drop down, it's only showing you views that have been saved with the same record type. So if I want to look at something that was designed off of an invoice record and I'm sitting on a vendor record, I won't see that view until I jump or drill down to the invoice level, and then when I click that drop down, I will see views that have been created using the invoice record. We can also put conditions on these views, just like we can in Report Designer. And each one of the drill downs or each one of the jumps can have its own set of conditions. So that's why kind of some planning needs to be put in place if you are going to be using this inquiry for a specific reason. And it could be that you might want to build an inquiry that shows everything, and then you want that same inquiry for specific users or for a specific condition to view. You can copy these inquiries to different names and go in and put conditions on those copies. So you can have multiple versions of the same inquiry. Okay, formulas. A couple of things to remember here. You only have access to public formulas and application formulas. So there's no such thing as a quick formula in Inquiry Designer. The public formulas that you use have to be designed for the specific record that you are going to be pulling into the inquiry. So when you do the list, you're not going to see formulas that don't use all fields from the same record. There's kind of a rule about that. And then the application formulas, again, these are provided by Sage, but you're only going to see the ones that pertain to that particular record. All right, inquiry planning. So who's going to use this inquiry? That's the main thing. Who's asked for it, and then what is it that they want to see on each of the levels or within each of the jumps within that inquiry. Okay. I would probably design or create a worksheet, just like we did in the report designer class, where you can have some stuff filled out prior to sitting down at your computer to build this inquiry. As part of that layout, I would try to figure out, okay, which records and which fields from those records do I need to pull in? So you have that in hand, ahead of time too. And then any conditions that need to be added on any of these screens, have those handy. And then any calculations or formulas that you may need to build. Again, those need to be built as a public formula. So just some basic planning before you get in there. All right, so basics, the design basics, and this is what we're going to go through here in just a second. We're going to get into the software. So I'm going to show you how to create a brand new inquiry. I'm going to show you how to get into the designer and where you need to go to start building that inquiry. We're going to build some default table views. I'll show you how to set up a condition. We'll talk about sort orders. I'll show you where those can be locked in. I'll show you how to create a default form view, how to save the view, and then the jumps. That's actually going to be part of setting up the default table views. So this is all going to come together. So setting up a brand new inquiry, or even the same concepts with modifying an inquiry. We're going to be looking at table views, conditions, sort orders, form views, and then jumps, whether it's a table jump or it's a column-specific jump. All right, so let's go back into the software, and I'm actually going to come into Inquiry Designer. So if you're looking at the Sage desktop, this will be spelled out under the applications as Inquiry Designer. If you're looking at TS Main, it is the ID icon that's at the top of the TS Main window. All right, once you're in Inquiry Designer, you'll click on the Inquiry drop-down. Below the Inquiry Manager, it's showing you all the different inquiries that are out there at this point. You can actually run the inquiry from here to test it once we build it. But this is just the same as running an inquiry from inside the application. So all the applications are listed, and then all the sub-inquiries, and then the menus, and then the inquiries themselves. To actually create or modify an inquiry, you go to Inquiry Manager up here at the top. And then this brings in a window. It wants to know which application you want to set this inquiry up for. So you'll just use the scroll bar on the side, highlight the application that you want to build this for, and click OK. This brings up a screen that looks identical to Report Manager inside the individual applications, but we're doing inquiries instead. So from here, to build a new inquiry, you're going to click New. So don't worry about the list here. You'll only select from the list if you're modifying an existing inquiry. If this is brand new, click on New, and it brings up the new inquiry window where you will give it an inquiry name. And then you'll select the menu group that it needs to go under. And I don't think we have a special one here. I'm going to create one here just called Custom. Any name that you type in here under menu group, it will automatically create that group for you. And we'll see it when we finish creating the inquiry. And then underneath you see a list of all of the AP, because we selected accounts payable as our application. These are all the records in accounts payable. you need to select the starting level. So we're going to start at the vendor record. So you just highlight the record, and then down here at the bottom, you will click on Define Levels. And when you click that, it brings you into our first view. You'll see here, by default, it brings in the vendor ID and the vendor name. From here, we can start adding columns to the inquiry. And this is just the same as if you had brought up an inquiry in AP and you want to add a new field. The easiest way that I find to do it is you just click in the heading up here at the top, and then it brings up the options, and it kind of drops it down at the bottom. But here we can edit, we can insert before, we can add after, or we can delete a column. So if we want to add a column after this column, just highlight that option, click OK, and it brings up a field list where we can select. I'm going to go down and find year to date. We'll just build this just like the example in your book. I could put this in alphabetical order, might be easier. And we'll just find year-to-date amount. And then I always double-click on it so that it pulls the headings in, the default headings in at the top. And then you can modify those if you want. And then click OK. And it pulls those into the design. Now, there's an important note at the bottom of page 9. The starting record cannot be changed once you start adding more records to the inquiry. So once we start defining jumps, we can't go back and say, you know what, I don't want to start at the vendor record, I want to start at the invoice record instead. It's too late. You'd have to delete this inquiry and start the inquiry over. Now, buttons at the top, before we move on, the red X will always close the window that you're on. The blue always takes you to the next level or does the jump. So if we want to go to the next level in this inquiry after we've built it, that's how we move. The form view, and we're going to come back to that in a minute, this button here. Conditions are the blue funnel where we can set conditions here. The sort order, if we want to change our sort order on this particular view, we can. Now, if I click on that, you'll see these are the alternate keys. So I can, instead of by vendor ID, we could do it by vendor name. Okay. Select will let me go to a different record. So I've started here on vendor 100. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. I'm sorry. Let me get. Oh, yep. So this is the other way to add a column. So before I was clicking up here in the name field, the header of the column, the heading, to get this little window. If I hit cancel there, you can use this button. The select button gets you the same thing. It's the it's the find button that I was looking for. Here, this find button lets me go to a specific vendor. So if I wanted to jump to 2000, let's say, then it takes me there. So I go back to the top. Okay. All right. In the define or in the design mode that we're in, this is what we're going to use to define jumps. So this button here, or we can even use the blue button here. So between these two, it will get us to a defined jump area. View options here, this is for security. Excel, the nice thing about the inquiries are you can download these to Excel and they come across really clean. So if you have got someone that needs information to go to Excel, it might be easier to design the information in an inquiry first and then export it to Excel from here. Report Designer, if you do it that way, sometimes the columns don't line up and they kind of overlap each other, so it's a little bit harder to get that clean Excel report. It might be easier to do it with Inquiry Designer. This last button here, switch to classic view. For those of you that were on the older version of Sage, let's say before 13, it had the screens had a slightly different look and feel, and actually the screenshots I left in your handout on page 5, that's the old type of view. Notice that on those screens there are buttons at the bottom to do all of these things. Well, they've moved, in the newer versions of the software, they've moved those options up to the top with little icons instead. If you want to use the old style, you can simply click on that and it changes the display back to the classic view. All right. All right, so let's put a condition on this report. Not report, I'm sorry, this our default view here. So we're going to use this condition here, our condition button, and I'm going to say that we don't need to see any vendors that we haven't used yet this year. So we're going to change this to say not equal to blank. We're going to get rid of these ones here that have zeros in the year-to-date amount. So the conditions work the same. You pick a field off the list. You change your operator to equal to, not equal to, greater than, equal to, and then you put in a value. It works exactly the same. You can add multiple conditions here. So if I added another condition, you would use the or, the and or the or operator at the top, and then whatever the values need to be for the second condition. And then just OK that. Notice that my zeros went away here. All right, let's also do something with our sort order. And that button is right here. And let's just do it by name instead. A lot of people would rather look for their vendors by name. And this way, you don't have to remember what the vendor ID is. This could show it to you. We want to leave it on the screen. But we don't want to have it in that order. It might be easier to find your vendor by vendor name instead. Now let's go ahead and look at a form view at this point. All right, so the default on the form view is to bring up kind of the key to that record. So in this particular view, it's showing us just the vendor ID and the vendor name because that is the key to this particular record. So we can add things to it. We can move things around. We might want to go ahead and maybe highlight this and move it up so it's up a little higher. Then you just click where you want the field to be. So if we choose our option here to create the field, and then here we can pull in the field that we want. Click OK, and it brings it in. Okay. So we might maybe even change that to be the contact. Let's build the view the same as what we have on our example here. Okay. And then we might decide that we want to add some summary totals here. So we're going to go ahead and put some text in here, and I'll just, again, click where you want it to be. Click on Create Text. Type your text in. We can, select the style, and then we can select a color. and then it brings it in. And then again, we can start adding fields to this area here. So we just go ahead and let's just bring in. Actually, let's go ahead and change this to alphabetical order again. Maybe bring in. Yeah. So it just depends on what you want to see on this form view. Okay, then we want to get back. We want to jump back. Let's see. So use your arrow to move back. We're going to say yes, save the changes to this form view. We're going to give it a name. And then just say yes to that. And then it brings us back to our table view. And I've got some examples here on page 15. Every time, it's kind of confusing, but every time you move from window to window, it's going to ask you if you want to save the changes to that form view or that table view. All right, the next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to do a jump. We're going to say, well, once we're here, we want to be able to double click on this vendor ID, and we want to jump to the invoices that are available or that have been entered year to date for this particular vendor. So we're going to use the button here that says Define Jumps. Okay. And where we want to jump here gives us a list of the records that we can actually jump to from here. We want to jump to the invoice record. So all you need to do is highlight the record. It'll pre-fill the screen for you here, and then you click OK. Now we have some other options here. We can actually jump, depending on where we are. We can click this Applications button, and we can tell it we want to go into a different application. Maybe go to General Ledger and look at some account information. So it just depends on where it is you want to jump to when you click that jump button. In this example, we're going to go from the vendor record down to the invoice record. So we'll click OK here. And then once you click OK, you need to double click on the record or the vendor. It's going to give us the save prompt again, and we're going to say that this is our ID class default vendor, and we're going to save the conditions that we set up on this view, and we're going to make the default view for this our default vendor view. So say yes to that. Now this wants to know, where do you want to get this information from when we do the jump? We're going to tell it to highlight the master file. Now, we can unselect this checkbox here, default during inquiry, select during inquiry, meaning this window is going to pop up when we actually run the inquiry in AP. I know you've seen this before when you've run some of the Sage inquiries where it's asking you to pick the file that you want to run this from. If you select invoice, that means it's going to look to the new invoice file. If you select the master file, it's going to look at the invoices that have been posted to the master file. Okay. All right, so this has taken us down to the next level, which is the invoice level. So we can do more things here. We can put some more columns in here, and let's go ahead. We're going to add, we've got the invoice, we've got the description. Let's actually get the amount in here. And then let's actually add, before this column, let's get the invoice date. So we can, we can clean this up as, as however you want. We might even add over here amount paid. We've got the full amount. We can grab the amount paid, pull that in on this window. Okay. All right, then from here, we may decide, we want to be able to see, if we click on a value here, we might want to be able to see the check number, the bank that this was paid from. We want more payment information from here. So we may go ahead and say, let's define another jump here that's column specific. And we want to go, let's see. We want to go to the check record. So that we highlight the record that we want to jump to. It automatically pulls all of this in for us. We need to give it a view name. So let's call this the ID class check view. We're going to highlight the AP check. That's where we want to jump. And we're going to say OK. And then it wants to know here what the key is. We're just going to leave it as the default. Now what should happen then is if we double click here, okay, there, yes. All right, so it has taken us to the bank, and these are all the checks, but that's not exactly what we wanted to see here. Let's go back. Let's try this again. So we come in here. We want this to be a column specific. I bet we need to get down to the invoice level. That's why. Okay. So let's go here, and we're going to remove this column specific jump. And let's go one more level down. So let's define another level. And we want to go to the check record from here. So let's try that. This can be so confusing here. Just a minute. All right, let's go back here. Let's get all the way back to the beginning. Define this jump. Let's go back here. Let's see if that gets us better here. Yep, here we go. Okay. So let's go here. That should have taken us there. Let's go here. Let's define a jump here. Let's get to, maybe we should go to the distribution level from here. Oops. So as you can see, you need to play with this to get to the right. Here we go. So here, this gets us to the distribution level. So let's get rid of some of these columns. Get rid of that. Oops. Cancel. Delete this column. Let's add. So what we might want to see here is the job, GL account number, maybe the amount. Okay, let's go ahead and save this. This is our distribution. Okay, so this takes us back. So here, let's go in here. Let's look at this. So we're seeing that. This column-specific one that always gives me a little bit of fits here. Let me try redefining that jump again. All right, so I wanted to go to the check record. Let's try it with that. Yeah. All right, there we go. But this is giving us a little bit more information than what I was asking for. Hold on. Maybe I've got the wrong jump here. Let's see. Let's define this jump again. We're going to tell it we want to go to the invoice payment instead of the check. Maybe that's where I'm making my mistake. Let's try that. That's better. All right, let's change this so that we see the check. That is the check number, so let's change the description on this to say check. All right. We don't need a description, so we can delete that out of there. Let's add put amount paid back in there. And add another column. We'll add the bank. Okay. So we'll save that. We'll call this new. Okay. So let's go back to the beginning. Okay. Well, after some clumsiness, fumbling around here, I think we've got it. So this view will start out at the vendor record, showing us year-to-date, only vendors who have year-to-date amounts. By double-clicking on the vendor ID, I see all the invoices that have been entered to this vendor. I see the amount of the invoice and the amount paid. If I double-click on the vendor again, or the invoice, either the vendor or the invoice, it'll show me the distribution records. I can go back to the invoice view, and if I want to see payment information, be sure you select invoice payment like I didn't the first time, not check information. If you click on the dollar amount in that column on any vendor, it will show you the payment information, which it didn't save it did not save the columns that we set up. Why? Yikes. Okay, let's delete that. Again, let's delete that again. Let's just add one column to it here. We'll add the check to it. Go back. Yes. Okay, let's try this one. Okay. Now let's try it again. Go in, double click. That is so strange. It's not saving the jump like it should, the view. Okay, so let's try deleting this, delete this. Again, let's go back, let's say yes. Let's give it a different name, ID, check number. But it didn't ask me if I want that to be the default. That's weird. So it's not going to save it. Okay, I'll have to work that out and let you guys know why it's not saving that view. Let's go ahead and close, and I'm going to tell it to save the inquiry. And now that inquiry should be at the very bottom. It is. So I can open this up. It's already got the defined start levels. If I want to make changes, so I can go back in, and it's here. Now notice up here at the top, it's filled in the default view here. And if I click the drop down, notice all these other view names. So I can change. I can temporarily change. Maybe I want to get a phone list while I'm looking at this particular inquiry. I can do that. I can get insurance information. These are views that have already been created and saved from the same record. I can go ahead and jump to the next view. Yeah, let's see what happens here. Yep, still have the wrong one. Okay, or I can come back. Now, the other thing I can do, if I want this to always use that view, I can open this up again. So see how it's defaulted back here. I should be able to change the default view here. So if I change, maybe I want to go with vendor totals instead of what I had before. Oops, that's not what I wanted here. Let's see. Nope, should be a way to save this. Nope. change that so that it always uses this view. Come on. Come on. I don't want to do that. Oh, there it is. See this little button right here with the arrows? Change default view. So now, when I save this, close out, come back in, open this up. Oops. It's got the new view. Okay, so if you change this, then this little button here pops up, change default view. Okay, now this, if I close out of here, I can take a look at, it's doing its little synchronization. I can take a look here under under accounts payable. Notice my custom is now here. This is the submenu that I created. So it's here for ID, the ID class. If I take a look directly in accounts payable under inquiry, I actually have to close. You have to close out of your application and then reopen it up. So my class inquiry is here. So here's the window I was talking about before, where it asks you to select the file. And then from right here, I've got the inquiry. Again, I can change the view. I can actually change the view at any level. So if I look at this is what we built in the setup. But if I click the drop down, I'm seeing a different set of views that were created from the invoice record. If I double click again, I can see a different set of views that were designed off the distribution record. And I can jump to any of those. Because again, remember, all of these views are in the same file, that apuser.inq file. They've all been named. All the views have been named. They can be shared amongst the inquiries that are there as long as they're using the same record. Now here I can jump to this. Here is the here are those ones that I saved and created, but it did not put didn't save it as a default. Okay. So here's one that is showing the check number and the amounts. I'm not sure why it's given us an error there, but that is okay. Don't have any that. So it just depends on what you're looking at. All right, so back in Inquiry Designer, under Inquiry Manager, the other things that we can do here, if we take a look at our class design, we have some options here. This is on page 22 in your handout. So the defaults in ID are set to allow modifications. See all these checkboxes here? We're allowing multiple views per level. We're allowing new default views. We can meaning we can change them. we're allowing modification of a current view and then allowing the modified view to be saved. Now, if you have Inquiry Designer and you don't want others to go in, and you might want to allow them to add things to your inquiry, but you don't want them to be able to save it. You need to bring the inquiry up here in Inquiry Designer and go into Options, and you need to uncheck this bottom box. And vice versa. If you've got an inquiry that you're always having to go in and make the same changes, and it's not prompting you to save when you exit out of that inquiry, bring the inquiry up in Inquiry Designer, go to Options, and check this box. Otherwise, they'll have to add the fields every time they go into that inquiry, or come in here and permanently add for them if you don't want them to be able to make those changes themselves. Okay, so you've got some options here to play with as far as allowing modifications and saving those changes. You've got some attachment options here. The default is to let you look at and edit any attachments. So if you're attaching files or notes, you've also got the condition options, whether you're going to allow them to be able to change conditions at all levels or not. You can pick the bullet that you need to use. Don't worry about this access ID. This is an internal thing. The same with the toolbar text. So what you're worried about here are the view options, attachment options, and condition option. Okay, again, if you want to add multiple applications to an inquiry, that's what this button here does. It allows you to select other modules that you can pull into the same inquiry. You might want General Ledger in here because you want to add maybe the account titles or year-to-date totals, something that out of GL that needs to go maybe on the distribution screen that needs to come out of General Ledger. Or it might be something that you want to pull out of job cost. Just select the application that you need in addition to the one that you're building. And when you click OK on that, you'll see that it adds those records to the list. So if this is a brand new inquiry, you've picked AP and JC, maybe this inquiry needs to start at one of the JC levels. And then from there, you just click on Define Levels. Now, the rest of these buttons are just the same as what you see in Report Manager. You've got change, if we want to change an existing inquiry. If you want to copy it to another name so that you can maybe add different conditions to it, you can. If you want to delete it off the menu, this is where you do it. Arranging, meaning moving where this inquiry is positioned, up or down. If you want to export it from one application to another, that's what the export-import does. It lets you take an inquiry that maybe you designed in AP and export it and then pull it in with import and maybe into a job cost screen or menu. That's what I mean by that. So you're taking it off of an AP inquiry drop down. So we're talking about down here where maybe I want to take this custom one here and I want to move this off of AP and move it into job cost. So I would use export and import to do that. So the security part of this, this is also on page 22. You have to go to the Define Levels. So you have to open up here, and you have to go to Define Levels. And then you have to go to the View options, which are which is what we saw right here. This was the security that we talked about. So if you want to protect this, you can write protected. And you can also put in a security role here. I don't have security turned on this machine, but you could, if I did, I would be able to put a role in here, and these would be the only people that could make changes. And you would need to do that on each view within the inquiry. Okay. All right, so sorry for the stumbling around there with the column-specific jump. I think with a little bit of practice there, you should be able to create your jumps from the main record. Defining a jump from vendor to invoice and invoice to distribution is fairly straightforward and simple. The column-specific ones can, as you can see, are a little bit more tricky. You need to make sure, like I didn't do, that I was on the right record to create that jump in the first place. But you should be able to jump from any specific column on your inquiry, either at the main level or within a specific column on within that view to another record. You just need to make sure that, like I said, make sure that you're jumping from the correct record to the record that you want to jump to. Okay, so some tips here before we're done for today. Make sure that you lay out the inquiry before you start. You want to make sure that you get enough information so that you are, not wasting a lot of time trying to pull in the information that somebody has asked for. Remember that views can be shared, so take a look at the ones that are already there to see if there isn't one already in place that you can pull in as the default view for the one that you're creating, or that you can tell them use this view or use this inquiry instead. It has the information that you need. Or, like I said, pull in one and start it there as the default and make changes. Remember that you're naming these views as you go, and then overall you're naming each jump within that inquiry. And you can pull, parts from, bits and pieces of stuff that are already there in place. Okay, as long as the records are the same. That's the key to this. When you click that drop down, it's only going to show you tables that belong to that record. Okay, questions? I know that was a little jumbly, and I apologize for that. But if you guys have any questions, we can do them right now. Tina, if you want to unmute them, that would be okay. And they can go ahead and ask questions now. Tina, are you there?
Bought or purchased ourselves, or do they need to supply us one?
I didn't hear the first part of that.
Sorry, what was that first part of that question?
Okay, I'll get to the bottom of it. And like I told them, after all this is over at 1:30, if I have to, I'll drive down there myself. I may resend me everything. I might have to be down there since they put my name in that letter.
Yeah, so that wasn't part of the question.
Yeah, did you get the handouts? Is that what you're asking about?
I'll get all these done right here because I'm really not even paying.
Okay.
No,
No.
Sorry, go ahead. I think that was about something else.
Yeah, if we can get you the handouts. They'll step you back through. If you have the ID application on your system, you can actually walk through those screenshots and build a simple inquiry to start with. And those screenshots will help you do that.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? Everybody's unmuted, so if you have questions, you can speak right up, or you can send them on chat.
Yeah, if you want to, or email us too. Tina can forward those to me.
Yep, that's true. So, good. Well, I think we're good, Jeanette.
Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. We're doing a financial statement designer class next, and that's going to be next week, next Tuesday. So we'll be happy to see you there if you are able to attend. That will be great. Thanks again for joining us, and with that, I think we're done. So a short class today.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.